Hi everyone and welcome to SQL University. Today we're talking about SQL Server Management Studio. Management Studio is one of the most basic tools that an administrator or developer can use when using SQL Server. What we see in front of us is the opening screen when you open Management Studio, and you're greeted with a box that asks you what server you want to connect to and what authentication method you want to use. In my blog post, I talked about two different authentication methods, Windows authentication and SQL Server. So as you can see here in the drop-down, you can choose either or. We're going to use Windows authentication for this demo. And here you can see that the username and password fields are blanked out because Management Studio is using the Windows credentials that you're authenticated with to the machine. So in this case, I'm logged into the machine with a username of Jorge and the domain is Galactica. So I already have my server name put in here of Adama, so we're going to go down here and just click connect. When you click connect, you see an icon appear up here. This is your database. The green icon shows that the database is up and running, and right there you see some important information up front. You see Adama, which is the name of the server you're connected to. You see that it's SQL Server 10.0.2531, which is your build number, which is important to know that because that's your patch level. And finally, the last thing there is the username that you're connected to the instance with. So again, we see Galactica Jorge. Underneath, you see the traditional folder structure that Windows has. So we're going to just go through some of the more simple ones. So we have databases, and if you click the plus sign, it expands, and we see these are all the databases installed on the server. Furthermore, if you open up one of the databases themselves, so we're going to look at the AdventureWorks, you see more options for the database itself, in that you can see database diagrams, tables, views, synonyms, and a whole bunch of other options. Also, you can right click on a database and go down to properties and see even more options. So we're just going to open this up real quick and take a look at. So here you can see some basic information: when this database was last backed up, name of the database, the owner, date created. Further down the list, we're going to go to security. Now the security folder is pretty important as an administrator because here we have our logins. In order to connect to a SQL server, you need to explicitly add a login and give them permission. So here we see a list of all the different accounts that have access to this particular SQL server. So if we go down to the account that I'm logged in as, we can double click it, or we can right click and go to properties, and we can see some information about this account, such as what roles this has on the server, what databases this particular account is mapped to, and the status of the account. These are all important things to know as an administrator. Further down the security list, you have the server roles. SQL Server has several built-in roles that each have their own level of security clearances, if you will, which we'll cover later in a security class, but just know that these are there. Server objects. In this course, we're going to really just focus on backup devices. Backup devices are virtual tape drives, if you will. You can create a backup device and you can point your SQL Server to backup database to this virtual device, and that virtual device can live on a local disk or a file share. The rest of these options are more advanced things. Endpoints are for replication or high availability type stuff. Linked servers is another feature that SQL Server can do, and triggers is more of a development thing that we can cover later. Replication, this again, this will be covered later in a high availability course, but that's there. Finally, in your management folder, you see that here we have 3 new features to SQL 2008 that weren't available in 2005 or any previous versions. One of them being policy-based management, which is one feature that's near and dear to my heart. The data collection and the resource governor. Those are great features that again we'll cover later. Maintenance plans. In order to keep your database healthy and going strong, you can automate several administrative tasks. You do that by creating a maintenance plan. A maintenance plan can contain one or more of these administrative tasks, and we'll cover that later as well. SQL Server Logs is a very important folder to know about. Here you see the current log, which is what's actively going on in the archive. One thing to know about the SQL Server Logs is, how does it know when to archive a log? Whenever the SQL service is restarted, it takes the current log, moves it down to archive 1, and pushes down the rest. You're able to actually configure it to hold more than 7 logs, but by default that's how many it holds. So we're just going to open this by double clicking on it, and here you can see all the things that are going on inside of SQL Server at an administrative level. So here we could see that the MDW database was starting up. This is setting a database option, and there are a couple errors here. So SQL log is one of the first places you're going to go to troubleshoot any possible problems, and we'll go through that in a troubleshooting course later this semester as well. The SQL Server agent is a service that runs separately from your SQL Server service, and what the agent does is it allows you to automate tasks or jobs within SQL Server. As far as the jobs go, they go right here under the jobs folder. And here we see that we already have 2 jobs here. And what you can do is, we're just going to open up a new job real quick. You can have a job that is made up of multiple steps, and each step you can do something different, like you can do a T-SQL, you can do PowerShell, you can do all sorts of things. It's a very powerful feature, and it's really helpful if you need to do some custom administrative work. We can get into that later, but just know that's there. Also, you can actually view the history of an individual job by right-clicking it and go to View History, and you can see all the different times that particular job is ran. So in this case, this job is run and failed twice. And if you expand this window down here, you can see all of the different things that this particular job did. And here we have an error code of 15404 and just a brief description of what happened. Down here we have an error logs folder. This one is separate from the system log. These are the error logs strictly for the SQL agent job, for the SQL Server agent. Remember that I told you that's a separate service, so it has its own log. So if we open that up, you can see that it looks the same, but there's a little bit of difference in it. So that's it for this walkthrough. I'm Jorge Segura, and this is SQL University.